You know that terrible ear-splitting sound when someone at an event walks just like a little too close to the speaker while holding a live microphone?
Oh, yeah. The worst.
Right, that high-pitched screech that makes literally everyone in the room cover their ears and wince.
Yeah, the dreaded audio feedback loop. I mean, it is a very visceral, very immediate physical reaction we all have.
Exactly.
You just want to run and unplug the system.
Right, but what if that exact same mechanical feedback loop could explain the absolute information overload you are feeling right now?
Oh, that's a wild thought.
Think about it. The relentless wave of news, the social media notifications, just the constant barrage of data we all swim in every single day.
Yeah, it's exhausting.
It really is. And today's deep dive is about the architecture of that global confusion. We are going to explore the big picture behind how human communication evolved, and we're going to do it without the dense academic jargon.
Thankfully. And to do that, we are looking at a highly specific, honestly, pretty wild piece of source material today.
Yeah, it really is.
It's an excerpt and a highly detailed schematic diagram from Guy Lakeman's work, The Architecture of Global Confusion.
Right.
Specifically, we're unpacking a section he titles Waves of Uncertainty and Social Mistrust.
So our mission today is to trace Lakeman's timeline. We are starting all the way back with, village town criers.
A long time ago.
Yeah, and moving straight through the invention of the printing press, the dawn of television, and right up to the year 2026.
It's quite the journey.
We are exploring his core thesis, which is that society has transitioned from a state of strict informational stability into what he calls uncontrollable global confusion.
It is a fascinating, almost purely mechanical way of looking at how we consume information.
Definitely.
But before we get into the gears of this machine, we do need to set a quick ground rule for how we are approaching this text.
Yes, a very necessary caveat here.
Yeah.
Lakeman's text and his diagrams, they contain some extremely strong, potentially polarizing critiques of modern media, historical institutions, and, frankly, just the general public's intellect.
Yeah, he doesn't hold back. He uses terms like ignorance and dictatorship quite liberally.
Exactly. So we need to be explicitly clear right up front. Our purpose here is strictly to analyze Lakeman's fascinating mechanical view of society.
Right, we're looking at the math.
Yes, the math and the structure of his argument. We are absolutely not endorsing his political, historical, or social critiques.
No, not at all.
We are entirely impartial, just acting as your guides to, unpack the mechanics of this blueprint.
And blueprint really is the most accurate word for it, I think.
Yeah.
Yeah. Lakeman isn't writing a traditional history. He has literally drawn a schematic.
It's very visual.
Very. He is looking at human history as a massive control system. Like, the way an engineer looks at a power grid or a car engine.
Well, let's lay out the foundation of that engine then. At the very top of Lakeman's diagram, before he even gets into the historical timeline, he draws a basic flowchart.
Right, the core loop.
Yeah. You have a box labeled information. An arrow points from there into a triangle labeled dispersal. And from dispersal, the arrow points to the final output, which is knowledge.
Simple enough.
But there is a line that loops backward. It takes that final knowledge and routes it right back into the incoming information via a box labeled feedback.
What's fascinating here is that this specific loop is the secret to understanding everything Lakeman is arguing.
How so?
Well, he is establishing that society doesn't just passively receive news and sit quietly. The most critical part of this diagram isn't the information itself.
It's the feedback.
Exactly. It's the feedback. It is how the audience's reaction, the resulting knowledge, actually loops back around to shape the next wave of data coming through that dispersal point.
Which honestly brings me right back to that screeching microphone.
Oh, I see where you're going.
Yeah, if you place a mic, which, represents the information intake, too close to a speaker, which represents the dispersal, the sound loops,
Yeah.
goes in, comes out louder, goes back in, comes out even louder. So looking at this flowchart, I have to wonder about the simplicity of Lakeman's model.
Okay, what do you mean?
Well, if society is just a giant public address system, is he essentially arguing that over the centuries, the screech of audience feedback has just gotten louder and louder until it deafened everyone?
In a structural sense, that is exactly what he's arguing.
Wow.
Yeah. When you have a feedback loop, the system's behavior depends entirely on how well that feedback is controlled or, suppressed or amplified.
So it's all about management.
Exactly. If the feedback is tightly managed, the system is quiet, it's stable.
Right.
If the feedback runs wild, the system screams. And that dynamic is exactly how Lakeman maps out the entire timeline of human history.
Okay, so let's look at the beginning of that timeline. The oldest era on his schematic is located way at the bottom of the page, and the graph he pairs with it is just a flat, horizontal line.
Perfectly flat.
Yeah. He calls this era push propaganda. We're talking about the town crier and what he labels church bias propaganda.
Right, and notice the mathematical graph next to it. It shows a tiny initial curve that almost immediately flattens out into a perfectly straight line.
And Lakeman explicitly labels this graph stable.
He does.
Okay, let's unpack this because I have to challenge the premise of linking those two concepts.
Sure.
Lakeman pairs this perfectly flat, quote-unquote, stable graph with the phrase religious dictatorship and control.
Yeah, it's intense phrasing.
Isn't it incredibly counterintuitive and maybe even a little dark that our baseline for a mathematically stable society is built on a complete lack of informational freedom?
Oh, it definitely feels counterintuitive if we equate the word stable with the word good or moral or truthful.
Right, which is what we naturally do.
We do. But remember, we have to look at this like engineers looking at a machine.
Okay.
In a mechanical system, stable just means predictable. It means the system doesn't oscillate. It doesn't shake itself apart.
Because the microphone is completely unplugged.
Precisely. In this push model, information only goes one way.
Right.
Think about the physical mechanics of a town crier. A man stands in the village square and rings a bell.
Hear ye, hear ye.
Exactly. He yells out the new tax decrees from the king. The public hears it. They might groan, they might complain to each other.
But the king doesn't hear them.
Right. There is no mechanism for their groan to travel back to the king's castle and change the next decree.
So there is virtually zero disruptive feedback allowed back into the system.
Right. Without feedback, the wave flattens. The system is entirely controlled from the top down, and therefore, mathematically, it is stable.
So stability in the ancient world comes at the cost of having a voice.
Yeah, pretty much.
But then technology throws a wrench into the gears. Johannes Gutenberg invents the printing press in Germany around 1440.
A massive turning point.
Lakeman notes this completely revolutionized information sharing, and this ushers in a new era he calls choice propaganda.
Yeah, so moving at the diagram, we hit the early 17th century with the first weekly newspapers.
Okay.
And this scales up massively by the 1830s with the rise of the penny press, cheap mass-produced newspapers. Now the masses have access to different sources of information.
They have a choice.
They have a choice.
But the graph changes here. It's no longer a flat line.
No, it's not.
It shows a wave, like a heartbeat on a medical monitor, but the wave quickly gets smaller and smaller until it flattens out again. Lakeman labels this audience choice but biased by publishers.
Right, because the feedback loop has been open. Just a crack.
Just a little bit.
Yeah. The audience can finally choose what to read. If they buy one paper over another, that tells the publisher what is popular.
Right.
And that creates a little ripple in the system, a wave of feedback.
But how does the wave flatten out? I mean, if the public is suddenly feeding their opinions back into the system by choosing what they buy, why doesn't it spiral out of control?
Because the publishers still hold the ultimate bottleneck. They own the physical printing presses. Mm-hmm. A printing press in the 1800s is massive, expensive, and requires a highly specialized crew to operate.
So you can't just start your own easily.
Exactly. If the public gets angry and writes 1,000 furious letters to the editor, which is raw feedback, by the way, the publisher can simply choose not to print them. They can absorb that feedback without losing control of the narrative.
Got it.
The wave decays. The system remains overall stable.
So it's like someone accidentally bumping the microphone stand on stage. You hear a little thud through the speakers, maybe a tiny ring of feedback, but the sound engineer immediately dials it back down.
That's a great analogy.
It settles. It doesn't spiral into a screech.
Right. The damping factor of the publishers keeps the societal system from oscillating out of control. They act as shock absorbers for public opinion.
Okay, so if the printing press only created a small, controllable ripple, what caused the massive, vibrating waves Lakeman plots as we move into the 20th century?
But this is a massive pivot in Lakeman's architecture. We move into the era of the mainstream press.
Okay.
And Lakeman explicitly associates this era with the support of, quote, screaming popular dictators.
Wow. The visual of the graph for this era is striking too. It is labeled marginally stable. It's a continuous, unbroken wave that just keeps rolling across the page. It doesn't flatten out and decay like the penny press wave, but it doesn't get wildly bigger either. It just hums.
It hums because the feedback loop is getting stronger and faster.
Okay.
Mass media, primarily national radio and early syndication, is reaching millions of people simultaneously.
All at once.
Exactly. The collective reactions of those millions are starting to dictate what the media produces next. The system is vibrating.
So the microphone is plugged in and it's starting to catch the background noise of the room.
Exactly.
But the real earthquake, the moment the structural integrity of the system starts to fail, happens a little further up the diagram.
Yes, the 1950s.
We hit the 1950s, the introduction of television, wider radio syndication, and crucially, advertising.
A huge factor.
Lakeman labels this era no choice, push propaganda, and for the first time in human history, the graph is formally labeled unstable.
Right.
The waves aren't just continuous anymore, they are actively growing larger and larger with each cycle.
And look at how Lakeman explains this mechanical failure. He attributes this growing instability to, quote, information distorted by social ignorance, media bias, to gain advertising revenue.
Okay, here's where it gets really interesting. Let's pause there, because this feels like the linchpin of his entire thesis.
It really is.
If advertising money relies entirely on capturing people's attention, and people inherently pay more attention to things that make them angry or afraid,
Right.
did the media start amplifying the feedback on purpose? Adding advertising revenue to the system feels like injecting a financial steroid directly into the feedback loop.
If we connect this to the bigger picture of systems engineering, you are hitting on the exact mechanism of the instability.
Really?
Yeah. Look at his use of the phrase social ignorance. In Lakeman's model, this isn't just an insult.
It sounds like an insult.
It does, but it's an architectural feature. This is the first time in history where the audience's own lack of understanding their raw emotional reactions actively fuel the system's growth.
Because calm, reasoned understanding doesn't keep you glued to the television screen during a commercial break.
Exactly. The media mathematically and financially benefits from catering to and actively amplifying that visceral, unthinking feedback.
Wow.
The feedback loop is no longer being damped by publishers trying to maintain order like they did in the 1800s. It is being intentionally stimulated by broadcasters trying to maximize ad revenue.
So they are holding the microphone closer to the speaker on purpose because the screech draws a crowd.
Yes.
And they can sell tickets to the crowd.
That is a perfect way to visualize it. The goal of the dispersal mechanism fundamentally shifted from informing the public to agitating the public.
Right.
Because agitation creates a stronger feedback signal, which is highly monetizable.
That is a chilling way to look at the golden age of broadcasting.
It changes how you see things, doesn't it?
It really does. And it perfectly sets up the disaster at the top of Lakeman's diagram.
Yeah.
If the 1950s was a broadcaster holding the mic closer to the speaker, the modern era is dropping the mic directly inside the speaker cabinet and locking the door.
Yeah, Lakeman categorizes this entire top tier of his schematic as interactive propaganda.
Interactive. Okay.
We are moving from the dawn of social media in 2010 straight into the predictive algorithms of 2026.
Let's trace his exact steps through our modern era. In 2010, we get what he calls internet social choice.
Yep.
The graph is still deeply unstable. The waves are growing steeper. He labels this push advertising interactive, and he calls out a very specific historical marker,
Which is?
the, quote, distortion of public encyclopedias through unqualified ignorance.
Right. He is highlighting the massive societal shift from centralized knowledge like, a published set of encyclopedias vetted by experts to crowdsourced knowledge like wikis and early social media feeds.
I understand the shift, but I find myself wondering if his framing is a bit too cynical here.
In what way?
Well, is it really just unqualified ignorance that's distorting the information? Or is it simply that the dispersal mechanism, that triangle in his very first flow chart, is completely overwhelmed by the sheer volume of data?
Oh, volume versus ignorance.
Right. Think about it mechanically. In 1950, a nation might have had 3 major TV channels.
Sure.
In 2010, there are hundreds of millions of individual voices publishing constantly. Is it ignorance causing the instability, or is it just the sheer mathematical volume of voices shattering the system?
This raises an important question, and that tension brings us to the most critical buzzword in this entire section of Lakeman's work. Interactive.
Interactive.
Yes. When a system becomes interactive, especially on a global, decentralized scale, the clear, definitive line between information and feedback vanishes entirely.
Wait, the line vanished? You mean the audience isn't just reacting to the news anymore, they are the news?
Exactly. Think back to the town crier days.
Okay.
The feedback loop was incredibly slow. It took days or weeks for the king to hear how the peasants reacted to a tax decree, if he heard at all.
Right.
During the era of 2010 internet social choice, the feedback loop is measured in hours or minutes.
Because of tweets and comments.
Right. And by the time we hit 2020, with what Lakeman labels AI chatbots highly global interactive, the feedback loop is measured in milliseconds.
Milliseconds. And how does that millisecond feedback loop physically alter the graph on his blueprint?
Well, by the time the timeline reaches 2026, the graph is labeled uncontrollable.
Uncontrollable.
Yeah. It is no longer a rolling wave or even a steep wave. It looks like a seismograph during a magnitude 9 earthquake.
Just chaos.
Absolute chaos. It is a series of massive, violent, jagged spikes. The black lines are vibrating so fast they basically blur together into a solid block of ink.
Wow.
And Lakeman's text beside this is incredibly stark. He says, we reach a state where social confusion increased ignorance, leading to a world fractured into social confusion, led by interactive ignorance into uncontrollable global confusion.
Uncontrollable global confusion. I mean, it sounds like the backdrop for a dystopian sci-fi novel.
It does.
But he's plotting it as a mathematical certainty based purely on the speed of the feedback loop.
Right, because the AI and the algorithms aren't just responding to our feedback anymore. They are designed to hunt for the screech.
Hunt for the screech.
Yes. The algorithm's entire purpose is to find the piece of information that causes the highest spike in your heart rate, the fastest typing speed in your comment, and then automatically turn up the volume to keep you scrolling.
So it predicts what will agitate us, generates new information based on that prediction, which we then react to, creating more feedback instantly.
Exactly. Milliseconds.
It's like every single person on Earth has been handed a live microphone, shoved into a tiny closet with a massive stadium speaker, and an AI is automatically turning up the gain on all of them simultaneously.
That's horrifying but accurate. The barrier between the microphone and the speaker has dissolved entirely. The system is feeding on its own output infinitely.
So what does this all mean? We have traced Lakeman's blueprint from the very bottom to the very top.
A long timeline.
Yeah. We started with the stable, suppressed, mathematically flatlined world of the town crier and the religious decree.
Right.
We watched the Gutenberg printing press create a little ripple of choice, a wave that was quickly damped by publishers who controlled the expensive bottleneck of production.
The shock absorbers.
Right, the shock absorbers. Then we saw that 20th century mass media realized they could make a fortune by intentionally amplifying the waves of social reaction for ad revenue.
Injecting the steroid.
Exactly. And finally, we arrived at the jagged, uncontrollable chaos of 2026, where AI-driven interactive platforms have spun the feedback loop so fast it's become a blur of global confusion.
It is a relentless, exhausting trajectory.
It really is.
And what makes it so compelling is that it is driven entirely by the physical mechanics of how information is dispersed and how feedback is utilized.
And this is exactly why you, listening right now, should care about this control system view of history.
Absolutely.
Because when you are scrolling through your feed today or watching the news, and you feel that deep exhaustion, that overwhelming information overload, it is so incredibly easy to think that something is wrong with you.
You think it's a personal failing.
Right. You think you just can't keep up. But Lakeman's architecture gives you a totally different lens to view your own life through.
It reframes the exhaustion completely. It shows you that this feeling isn't an accident and it isn't your fault. It is the mathematical engineered result of interactive feedback loops that were purposefully designed to monetize your reactions.
Understanding the mechanics of the machine is the first step to stepping outside of it.
I agree.
It gives you the power to take a breath, look at your screen, and ask yourself, is the media I am consuming right now actually providing knowledge, as Lakeman defined it in that first flowchart?
Good question.
Or is it just another piece of interactive propaganda designed to keep the wave vibrating? Like, is it vital information, or is it just the screech of the microphone?
And looking at it that way leads to a rather profound final consideration, I think.
Oh, what's that?
Well, we've been looking at Lakeman's data and his graphs for this entire deep dive, but let's look past the edge of the paper for a moment.
Okay.
Lakeman's final graph ends at the word uncontrollable in 2026. It just shows these wildly swinging, chaotic, jagged waves maxing out the chart.
Right. The system is pushed to its absolute mathematical limit.
Exactly. But in actual physics, in real-world systems engineering, when a feedback loop goes totally out of control, it doesn't just vibrate violently forever.
It doesn't.
No, the energy always has to go somewhere. The audio speaker blows out and goes dead.
Oh.
A car engine vibrating out of rhythm eventually throws a rod and seizes up. The system eventually shatters or burns itself completely out.
It breaks. The machine stops.
Yes. So if Lakeman's architectural model of human communication is mechanically accurate, what does the actual burnout of global information look like?
That's terrifying to think about.
When the noise gets so loud that the societal system fundamentally shatters, what completely new system will we be forced to build from the ashes?